Welcome back to Epic Literature. Last week we looked at the Epic of Gilgamesh and its relationship to Mesopotamian culture. Now we're going to move further west and in time to Homer's two great epics that serve as one piece of the foundation stones of European literature. It is no hyperbole to state that Western culture rises from the ashes of Troy, and Homer recounts this tale with grace and style such that it transforms the Grecian world and eventually civilization. Sing, O Muse, of the rage of Achilles, son of Peleus, that brought countless ills upon the Achaeans. These are the opening lines of Homer's Iliad, and they set a tone of darkness that permeates the entire text. Note several aspects here. First, the poem begins with an invocation to the Muse. Though she is not named, this muse is Calliope, one of the 9 muses who oversee the creative arts and labors of mankind. Homer is asking the gods to assist him in telling his epic story, and this is a convention that will follow epic all the way to Milton. Secondly, the song is about war, and the rage of one man in particular, Achilles, who you probably famously remember for his heel. His mother, Thetis, so the story goes, tried to make Achilles immortal as a baby by dipping his body into the river Styx. She baptizes everything but his heel, making him ultimately vulnerable, and he is slain at Troy as a result of her error. In fact, it is prophesied about Achilles that he will die in Troy. So he may either live a long, happy life at home in Greece, or he can go to Troy, where he will certainly die, but his name will be remembered forever. We know, obviously, which choice he made, as we are still studying him today. His quest for fame reflects the pagan belief in immortality. Since you cannot live forever, at least people after you will remember your name through great deeds. It is Achilles' rage that is the subject of this epic, rage that comes down on nearly everyone he meets, starting with his king Agamemnon and culminating with his hatred of Hector, Prince of Troy, who kills Achilles' cousin in battle. Finally, observe that Achilles' rage is poured out on everyone, but here the narrator specifically invokes the Achaeans, which is another word for the Greeks. In other words, Achilles inadvertently destroys his own people as a result of his anger. And that's where we find the Greeks, at the beginning of the story, in medias res, in the middle of things. The Trojan War has been raging for 9 years, with no end in sight. This all because Paris, Prince of Troy, gets caught in a contest between the goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. They demand that Paris choose which one is the fairest of them all. Hera, queen of Olympus, offers Paris power. Athena, goddess of wisdom, offers him wisdom. And Aphrodite, goddess of love, offers him the most beautiful mortal in all the world. So, naturally, Paris chooses Aphrodite, who gives him the already married Helen of Sparta to Paris in exchange. Helen's husband, Menelaus, wants revenge for this insult, and enlists the aid of his brother Agamemnon to take back the absconded lady. So Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships, becomes the pretext for Agamemnon to take over Troy, so that he might become the undisputed ruler of the Mediterranean. But when we meet Agamemnon, he is at a stalemate, primarily because Achilles, Greece's finest warrior, refuses to fight. Achilles has been insulted when Agamemnon steals Chryseis, Achilles' war prize. Thus it is Agamemnon's impiety, his rudeness, and we are also told that his impiety, this rudeness, is the will of Zeus. So we see the gods have a very direct, controlling, but not necessarily kind and providential influence in the lives of men. This conflict is contrasted with the heroic Hector and his eventual personal quarrel with Achilles. Hector is the defender of home and hearth in Homer's tale, and he accidentally slays Achilles' cousin Patroclus in battle, an error which Achilles cannot forgive. Achilles challenges Hector to single combat. Now the gods have a stake in this conflict too, and they argue for whom should win. Eventually, Zeus settles this by holding out the scales and letting fate decide. An illustration that in the Grecian worldview, even the gods could not control fate. Hector dies, but Achilles adds insult to injury by taking Hector's body and refusing him burial, which meant Hector could never make his way to the afterlife. King Priam of Troy is escorted by Mercury to the Grecian camp to beg Achilles for the body, which has been miraculously preserved from decay. And in one of the most touching human moments in the story, Priam kisses Achilles' hands, claiming he has endured what no mortal has ever had to endure, which is to kiss the hands of the man who killed his son. Priam appeals to Achilles' love for his own father, Peleus, and respectfully asks that Achilles do the right thing. Achilles does, and the text ends with the customary funeral games for Hector, Prince of Troy. Where the poem does not end, strangely enough, is the climax of the Trojan War. Every good little Greek boy and girl would have known the tale of the fall of Troy, of Odysseus and the Trojan horse, of the fires that burned Troy's walls. This was part and parcel of the histori qua mythology of the great Trojan saga. But Homer doesn't recount this important plot at all. In fact, he will skip right over it when he moves on to Odysseus' story in his sequel, The Odyssey. This tells us that Homer is doing something very different here. He is not wanting to tell the entire story of the Trojan War. In fact, we're only covering the space of 1 week in the whole 9 years. He's not wanting to show us the most sensational episodes in the history, although he does choose some sensational events. Rather, he seems to be calling our attention, I think, to some of the more human elements in the entire conflict. But I will leave you to interpret what those human elements are and what they say about humanity. So questions I always ask my students when studying this text are as follows. Number 1, what is the nature of the gods? How do they interact with each other and with mortals? Further, what does this say about the kinds of gods Greek culture worshipped? And what does their worship say about the kinds of people the Greeks became? Number 2, what is the role of honor in this saga? Achilles refuses to fight essentially because Agamemnon has taken his girl. Thus, he would rather see the Greeks lose than himself be dishonored. Number 3, how does one find immortality in such a violent world where life is cheap and often cut short? Number 4, is Achilles' loss of Patroclus poetic justice, or is it some kind of tragedy? Number 5, what do you think about Hector running from Achilles? Is this some sort of strategy on his part? Is it cowardly? How are the gods involved? What is the role of fate? And to what extent do the gods exercise control over fate, if at all? If Achilles represents war and wrath, and if Hector represents peace and civilization, then what does their conflict conclude about Hector's death? And what does this suggest about the Homeric worldview? Why do you think Achilles decides to give up Hector's body to Priam? What does this suggest about Achilles' role and his new view, or altered view, or even continued view of honor? Then finally, what does the poem end where it does? And what does it say about Homer's purpose and focus of the poem? Godspeed your reading.